You cannot run operations through a political optic. Operations should be led and devised and approved by the people that know what the hell they're doing. That doesn't mean you don't do it with White House approval, but you cannot allow a political, optic to change that. Bay of Pigs is a perfect example of that, and many, many others.
An excerpt from today's guest, whose memoir on Shadow Ops has become a New York Times bestseller. Legendary CIA paramilitary and operations officer Ric Prado is here to talk about his book, Black Ops, The Life of a CIA Shadow Warrior. And I'll speak with him right after this break. I'm Robert Child, and this is Point of the Spear. I've just released a brand new documentary you can watch online for free on Tubi, the streaming service from Fox. The show is called Weather and Warfare, Millennia to Modern Time.
Weather and Warfare dramatically retraces the meteorological forces during battlefield engagements that doomed or saved civilizations. In 1588, more than half of the Spanish Armada, on its way around northern Britain, was destroyed by storms in retreat back to Spain. Napoleon's attack on Russia was stopped cold by winter weather, as was Hitler's siege of Leningrad.
Just click on the link in this episode's description to watch on the web, or download the app, or watch on Roku for free. I hope you check it out. Welcome back. Today's guest is a retired CIA operations officer who specialized in paramilitary, counter-terrorism, and clandestine operations. Escaping Cuba as a child amidst the violence of Castro's Cuban Revolution, he would go on to retire as the CIA's equivalent of a two-star general after a 24-year career. His book is called Black Ops, The Life of a CIA Shadow Warrior, and author and former CIA counter-terrorist chief of operations, Ric Prado, joins us now. Ric, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Robert.
Well, I always tell everyone it's an honor, and it is an honor, sir, to have you with us. And before we get into the book, I wanted to ask a little bit about your family history, because it was under Castro. Your family sent you to America. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that was probably God's way of forging myself for my future. I was 7 or 8 years old when the revolution was raging. The small town that I lived in was under attack, harassment attacks. And I literally saw my first firefight 2 feet from my face at the age of 7.5 or 8. That was something that gets your attention, especially at that age, but not in a negative way. I was kind of fascinated with the whole kinetic dynamics of what was going on. My parents thought otherwise, of course. But what came next was even more frightful, which was the takeover by communism, how quickly it changed the lives of my family and my first country. All the businesses being confiscated, the political abuses, the assassinations. It was rampant, and my dad made a decision that we were going to leave Cuba and try to immigrate to the United States. So we made it. We went up to Havana. Unfortunately, my parents could not get out initially. There was a program by the Catholic Church called Peter Pan program, and my father was able to get me into that program. That program in 2 years brought out I think it was 4,000 plus kids, I believe.
Wow.
But anyway, I was one of those. I got on a plane by myself at the age of 10 to go to the United States. I ended up in a Catholic orphanage in Pueblo, Colorado, Sacred Heart Orphanage. That was a growing experience, to say the least. But Robert, the biggest part of this phase of my life is it showed me the love of a parent, the sacrifice a parent is willing to do. I'm an only child. To put your son on a plane to a country you may not even ever go to. So I honestly believe that was kind of like my foundation for what I eventually developed.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm a father, and I can't imagine putting my children are older, but when they were 10, putting them on a plane alone. And having the thought that I would never see them again. Unbelievable. But they were able to join you, 8 months later, 10 months later?
Yeah, that's correct. About a little over 8 months later, they made it to the States just before the closing of the flights. And that was the first time I spoke to them or heard from them in 8 months.
Quite a beginning, that's for sure. When you got older, you decided to join the Air Force at the tail end of the Vietnam War. What was that like for you?
Well, it was an awakening. After high school, I had time to kind of grow up, and I realized that I had a huge debt of honor to this country for what it did for my family and for myself. And my draft number was so high, my parents had been celebrating because they thought I would never get. And I volunteered. I went into pararescue, and yeah, that did not go well at the home front. I can tell you that. But for me, it was a new beginning, and it was something of purpose. And my goal was to go to Vietnam.
Yeah, I saw that in another interview that I watched of yours. But the war wrapped up fairly quickly after you joined. And
Yes, by the time I got out of the pipeline and got my beret was late '72. By the time I finished the post training and all that, Vietnam was pretty much on being closed down.
yeah, they weren't sending any more troops over, just pilots, basically. So how after the war, how did your path cross with the CIA?
Well, the as much as I am proud and honored of being a pararescueman, I wasn't making a difference. Yes, I was jumping out of airplanes with scuba suits and all this great ninja stuff and having a blast, but it had no purpose. So I applied to the agency in '74. They were not hiring, they were firing at that time. And I applied again, I think it was in '79-ish. And by that time I was in the reserves and I was riding rescue with Metro Miami-Dade. And the combination of pararescue and the current medic skills, I was an EMT too. The agency said, look, we could use you on contract to support our Special Activities Division, which is, as you know, our Special Operations Forces for the CIA, in training and perhaps even some missions. That exposed me to them. I worked with those guys for a few months on and off. And then when Reagan took power and decided to do something about our communism in our backyard, he created the program, the Anti-Sandinista Contra program, as they called it. And the agency called me back because, like I told you, they've been firing before.
Right.
They didn't have a single native Spanish-speaking, Spanish-looking, Hispanic-looking guy that had paramilitary skills. That was my backdoor ticket into the agency.
And you ended up fighting alongside or training the Contras in Nicaragua to fight the communists. And I did watch some footage of you doing that. And how did it feel coming almost full circle, leaving a communist country to then fighting the communists?
For me, that was the most satisfying of all my career episodes. And at first, I didn't realize it. I just knew that I was having a great time. But I realized that now I am fighting the monster that I couldn't fight when I was 10 years old, the monster that destroyed my first country and that destroyed my family. And also the exposure to the purity of the combatants there in the Contra program. They all had a personal reason for being there. It wasn't political, it wasn't ideological. It was primarily, like my father, people desperate to regain freedom for their families.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that program ended up being shut down, unfortunately, because of an aviator that was shot down and captured, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that was Hassenfuss. That was the first time that it was shut down. It was restarted after that. Yeah, that was the beginning of a very big, long period where there was an attrition there. But Robert, this program was the first successful black operation, covert action that the agency had done in quite a while. And the reason it was successful is because through arming and training the Contras, we forced the Sandinistas to a negotiating table, and part of that deal was legal supervised elections, and they ended up losing power. But that for me was such a great episode, even though by that time I had left that program when they finally culminated in their peace, is because I was the first man on the counter camps for the agency period. And for the first 14 months of my tenure there, I did a little over 3 years, sleeping in a jungle hammock Monday through Friday. I was the only CIA officer allowed there. So I'm the one that taught them everything from headspace and timing on their 50 cals to RPG-7s, patrolling, intel. It was a very rewarding job. And like you read, we did get got caught in a couple of little ambushes that we had to kind of push our ways out of that.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Next time, something a little bit different. Historian and author Samuel Mitchum will be here with an extraordinary new book, The Encyclopedia of Confederate Generals, the definitive guide to the 426 leaders of the South's war effort.
Okay, Lucius Northrop, the commissary general, he was incompetent. The Confederacy never was properly supplied with food. You compare that to the Ordnance Department under Gaulius. When Lee surrendered, the men had no food. That was one of the reasons they had to surrender. But they all had at least 40 rounds of ammunition in their cartridge boxes. Some of them had 75.
That's next time. Summer is a great time for catching up on military history, and my book about the 7 Black Medal of Honor recipients of World War II is out now. Immortal Valor chronicles these timeless heroes' life journeys through all the pain and struggle until their ultimate triumphs. I hope you check out the book or audiobook, which is available now in stores and online. Now back to the conversation. It seemed like that your training was very effective with the Contras, because I noted the story of you training former lobster fishermen to be frogmen, commandos.
Yeah, that was probably the highlight of the positive highlight of my tenure there, because headquarters came in with a requirement. They said, look, you guys are doing great on raids and ambushes, but politically we need a good left hook to get these people's attention, let them realize this is not a ragtag bunch of farmers, that indeed they have some punch. So I came up with that idea. The Mosquito Indians, which are from the East Coast, and were always one of my favorites because they were natural warriors. One of them noticed that I had my military scuba badge on my hat. Mm-hmm. And he asked me if I was a diver, and he said that he was also, and he introduced me to 6 of his friends. And that stayed in the back of my mind. So I trained him. I spent 3 weeks on a deserted island, giving him compass swims and all this other stuff, and how to tie the devices under bridges. And we successfully, I took him out there to Puerto Cabezas, which was at the time the belly button of military logistics for the Sandinistas coming from Cuba, coming from the Soviet Union via Cuba. And we blew that thing out of commission for a while there, and that was a lot of that was a very rewarding mission.
Yeah, you sent them a message, that's for sure. In going through your book and reading it over, I saw that sections were redacted, which I thought was interesting, and it occurred to me to ask you the question, if you know it, how much of your work remains classified to this day with the agency?
Yeah, we left a little bit of the blackout there. There was actually a lot more than we left in the book. The publishers thought that there would be kind of a teaser, kind of a little bit of add a little mystique to it. Mm-hmm. My book spent 6 months at CIA getting approved. So everything that is in that book is fully approved. I would venture to say that 80% they allowed in the book, which to me was amazing. Being able to brief the Vice President of the United States on my special programs at the end of my career, all those things were a very pleasant surprise. There were some things I was hoping that they would let me talk about, but that didn't come through. Yeah, so I would say 20%. There's 20% there that remains, and I'll be honest with you. Out of that 20%, there's 10% that I would never want it to come out. So
yeah, I could imagine. Yeah. Well, maybe I couldn't imagine. As we entered the 90s, you got tasked to track, in 1995, a Middle Eastern financier who was funding terrorism and no one had heard of his name, but you were assigned to track him, and his name was Osama bin Laden. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was another milestone. I'm a plank owner of the Alex Station, Bin Laden Task Force, that was started in late '95. We actually broke ground on January of '96. Mike Scheuer, a renowned analyst, was the one guy that really knew about bin Laden. He had been tracking him, and he made a case strong enough to our seventh floor that they authorized this special station. We were actually a CIA station outside of our building, with releasing authorities and everything else to be able to task everybody in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, Robert, that's the very same unit that years later was finally able to geolocate, you know, Osama bin Laden and have our SEALs shoot him in the face.
Now, at the time, maybe the political will was not there, but you had opportunities to capture him or take him out. Why do you think that that wasn't done at the time?
Well, you know, we all have the benefit of 2020 hindsight. The old,
Sure.
What would have happened if we would have shot, you know, Hitler in 1937, you know?
Yeah.
But we did have great opportunities to neutralize him, not necessarily kill him, but even bring him to justice. We knew what he was doing. We had multiple sources telling us what he was doing, the corruption in Saudi Arabia, gaining money, the training camps. We had overhead of his training camps and everything else. But it wasn't politically palatable, as you mentioned. And here is the problem that we suffer in this country, which is part of our, you know, our strengths at the same time, is you cannot run operations through a political optic.
No.
Operations should be led and devised and approved by the people that know what the hell they're doing. That doesn't mean you don't do it with White House approval, but you cannot allow a political, you know, optic to change that. Bay of Pigs is a perfect example of that, and many, many others. Yeah.
Sure. Well, the whole Vietnam War would be another
Sure.
case of that.
Absolutely.
Now, you left the CIA just 3 years after 9/11. That got me thinking, what were your reasons for that? Because we were right in the middle of the war on terror.
Yeah, what happened was I was, like you said, I was chief of ops for CTC when 9/11 happened. I took over in May of 2001. And later in the year, or maybe even early 2002, I told Kofor Black, who was then my boss, director of the center, that yeah, we're hurting them in Afghanistan, but these people are worldwide. We need to have a program by which we can go out and you know, disrupt these individuals. One of the parts of the motto for CTC is disrupt.
Right.
These attacks, prevent and everything else, but disrupt is how you do it. So I came up with a concept of surveilling, making book lifestyle patterns of 2 or 3 major terrorists from each organization that are harming us: Hamas, Hezbollah, and of course Al Qaeda. And the concept was, if we were having the chatter that we had during 9/11, that we knew something was happening, but we just didn't know what, having 2 or 3 senior logistic support individuals that are accessible to us, can you imagine the disruption if all of a sudden 3 of those guys get taken out of business, whether it's arrested by the cops or duct taped and brought back to the States, mm-hmm. or the ultimate option, any organization that all of a sudden gets eviscerated at that level would put the brakes on whatever they're doing, because they would feel that they're compromised. So that was the concept that I proposed. That's the concept that I briefed the Vice President of the United States and Condoleezza Rice. They loved it, approved it. But when I saw that my agency had lost the determination to take this kind of step, I could not afford to have the quality of officers that I had in my unit be a paper tiger.
Right.
So I said, you know what? If I'm going to leave, I'm going to leave on a high. You know, I went from Osama bin Laden to chief of ops to my last 2.5 years on the street, even though I was a senior officer. I wanted to leave on a high.
That makes sense. And in reading your book, I noted that one of the reasons you wrote the book is the fact that the CIA has unfortunately gained a reputation of not being one of the best trustworthy organizations, and you say in your book that you wanted to change that because the people that you work with were not like that. Could you speak on that a little bit?
Absolutely, and it is definitely the number one reason that I wrote the book. I had never had intention of being an author, much less a best-selling author. That was never a moniker that I lusted after. But my agency is portrayed. The average American knows about the agency from what they see in Hollywood.
Right.
If you look at the theme from Hollywood, it's either a Jason Bourne type individual that is trained to kill, and then at the end they're trying to clean up their act because they don't want it to become public or to go to Congress, and they started hunting him down. And that's such a criminal approach to the patriotism and the heroism of my colleagues. Right. We have 139 stars on our wall of honor, and about a third of that is post 9/11, which means I know a lot of those folks. And I felt an obligation to give as many people as I can, and thank you for your help for getting the word out, a more healthy view, a more realistic view. You read the book, you know that if there's a black eye to be had, I gave them, because there were certain things that I criticized, like you said, not acting on bin Laden, and like I just mentioned about my special programs. But I wanted to make sure that people understood the quality of my colleagues, the ethos and the patriotism of the average CIA operations officer.
Well, it certainly comes through in the book. And the book is called Black Ops, The Life of a CIA Shadow Warrior. Ric, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Robert.
That's it for this episode. Thanks so much for joining me. Next time, something a little bit different. Historian and author Samuel Mitchum will be here with an extraordinary new book, The Encyclopedia of Confederate Generals, the definitive guide to the 426 leaders of the South's war effort.
Okay, Lucius Northrop, the commissary general, he was incompetent. The Confederacy never was properly supplied with food. You compare that to the Ordnance Department under Gaius. When Lee surrendered, the men had no food. That was one of the reasons they had to surrender. But they all had at least 40 rounds of ammunition in their cartridge boxes. Some of them had 75.
That's next time. And be sure to check out our Point of the Spear YouTube channel with bonus video material plus full military history documentaries. There's tons to explore, and I hope you check it out. I'm Robert Child, and this has been Point of the Spear.
Music licensed from audioblocks.com. Point of the Spear is produced by RSC Media Group.